We're ready for casualty location.
They have been, have the medics come to the north side of the FedEx building, please.
Control, we've got one confirmed person shot in the center of the lot, one confirmed person shot on the far west side of the lot.
10-4, 1 in center of lot, 1 far west side of lot. Units, are we ready for the comm van?
Got one confirmed shot in the A&D office.
Units, establish a team to start getting people out.
Go ahead. I told medics to come to the north side of the parking lot. I told them that's where it's safe.
Okay, we'll be evacuating people out the door close to U301. I think it's going to be door 4.
Evacuating out door 4.
Obviously, we need a team to corral these people as they come out. We're searching them as they come out.
352 control to the people out, to the officers outside the building. A lot of civilians are coming out. We've done a cursory search on them. Search them again.
Edward 321, control.
And we're batting them down as they come through the entryway here.
A fireman's with us, but we need medic back here so she can get transported.
Do we have this building secure on the outside?
311 to all units on FedEx. Do we have any other living victims that need an ambulance?
Yeah, I got one out here by the Decatur Ladder 71.
And a search team are clearing the building now.
As of right now, we've had no one show up to Eskenazi. We're just staging here. Like I said, I don't think they're going to have enough cars to follow ambulances down to the hospital. So we just came down because we border their district. Like I said, right now they're looking or needing more manpower to man the perimeter around the FedEx facility. So I don't know if ERG is going to get pulled down there or not.
The police presence was massive. 105 officers from Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, or IMPD, responded to the scene, and the Indiana State Police, or ISP, assisted in the investigation. A family reunification center was established in the ballroom of the Holiday Inn Express Hotel. Witnesses were transported to the hotel by Indigo buses to be reunited with their loved ones. The ballroom immediately became uncontrolled as family members desperately tried to locate each other. People quickly grew exasperated after waiting for hours for answers and direction. Victim service units, advocates, and chaplains came to the hotel reunification center straight away, offering comfort to families that waited throughout the night for their loved ones to be questioned and released. People were waiting, dressed fully in their nighttime pajamas. The shooting happened in the late evening hours, and most family and friends of the victims, witnesses, and survivors were home sleeping. Refreshments like chips, Slim Jims, pizza, and beverages were brought in, anything that could be done to comfort those in crisis, including the first responders.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
It is estimated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, that 73% of mass shooters target a location that they are familiar with, which appears to be the case here. Investigators have concluded that Gary specifically chose the FedEx building because he was formerly employed there. Despite this employment connection, there was no animosity between Gary and his former employer, certainly no reason for such a brutal and vicious attack. It seems he chose this building and time because he understood the layout and knew when the shift change occurred. After the shooting scene was contained, police investigators jumped into action and were seen removing boxes and computer equipment from Gary's home. A thorough review of all collected evidence proved that the shooting wasn't prompted by racial bias or apparent racism. It was a pure coincidence that some of the victims were members of the Sikh community. Gary just wanted to kill. It was that simple. He wasn't a disgruntled former employee, he wasn't anti-Semitic, or fueled by hate towards any particular minority group. Gary's motivation for such a deadly act was to commit murder and then kill himself. That motivation seemed to be driven by a need to show the world that he was a real man, as evidenced by his ability to murder innocent people. as if that could ever impress a rational or sane individual. There was obviously no connection between Gary and any single victim, which seems impossible given that he formerly worked for this company. Yet over 120 people were interviewed by police, and that investigation produced little to no other clues. It seems that he researched other potential shooting sites, but ultimately settled on the FedEx building. Officials indicated during a press conference that the shooting was, quote, an act of suicidal murder, and that Gary killed himself, quote, in a way he believed would demonstrate his masculinity and capability, while fulfilling a final desire to experience killing people. 19-year-old Samaria Blackwell was the youngest of 4 children in her family. The baby, if you will. An energetic and thoughtful young person, she was known to be competitive, especially when playing soccer and baseball. She was a straight A student that graduated high school the year before the shooting that robbed her of the bright future Samaria so deserved. Her family says that her greatest passion was helping others, and planned to become a police officer. Samaria will be deeply missed. Carly Smith was also just 19 years old when she was senselessly murdered. She, too, graduated high school from George Washington High School the year prior. Carly attended Crispus Attucks High School before transferring to GWHS, where she was a softball player. A true athlete, Carly played basketball and volleyball in middle school, too. Everyone described her as a real bright light in this world, and she had an extraordinary sense of humor. Taken from this world far too soon, Carly will be missed by all that she touched. Amarjeet Sekhon immigrated to the United States in 2004 and moved to Indianapolis to be closer to her family in 2019. She was known to be something of a workaholic, but she couldn't help it, and her work habits are likely the reason she was the breadwinner in her family. Amarjeet was extremely active and always on the go. Survived by her husband and sons, ages 13 and 19, Amarjeet will be missed. 50-year-old Yasvinder Kaur was just preparing to leave her shift when she was brutally murdered, without reason. She immigrated to the United States in 2018 and was also the main income source for her family. Yasvinder had 2 children, a son and daughter, who were still living in India when they tragically lost their beloved mother. She worked very hard on the 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. shift and regularly sent money to support her family in India. The loss of Yasvinder will be keenly felt by all her friends and family. 32-year-old Matthew Alexander was an Avon High School graduate and played baseball as the pitcher during his time there. Described as responsible, caring, and honorable, Matthew was loved by everyone that knew him. He was a serious basketball fan and, in fact, had an entire room in his house dedicated to memorabilia and collectibles. Matthew was taken well before his time, and he will be greatly mourned. The eldest victim, 74-year-old John Weissert, was a retired engineer who was working at the FedEx building to earn some extra income. He had been employed there as a package handler for almost 5 years. John was married to the love of his life and was looking forward to celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary in the fall. Such a long-lasting marriage is rare, and it's truly a devastating loss, not just for his wife, but also for the rest of the world. 19-year-old Gary was born on August 30th, 2001, and lived in a modest home with his family that included a stepsister. Gary grew up loving the outdoors and particularly enjoyed going fishing. He was a thrill seeker who loved roller coasters. However, his stepsister describes Gary as isolated and indicated that mental illness ran in his family. Indeed, Gary's mom says that he began battling with OCD as early as age 3, though he wasn't diagnosed until he was 10. Gary frequently expressed feelings of loneliness and had difficulties controlling his anger. In 2004, when Gary was only 3, which also directly correlates with his onset of OCD tendencies, his father committed suicide. Despite the apparent link, Gary says that his dad's suicide didn't affect him that much. He claims to have been so young that he had very little memory of his father. This may be true, but trauma can impact an individual even without vivid recollections of the past. His mother eventually went on to remarry, bringing a stepsister into his life. As mentioned, when he was 10, Gary was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and disruptive disorder and was prescribed 5 milligrams of Lexapro as a result. Lexapro is a drug that is commonly used to treat depression and anxiety. About a month after he started the drug, Gary was also diagnosed with OCD. This occurred after his mom discussed Gary's, quote, odd behavior with his doctor. The odd behaviors included Gary rocking back and forth when watching TV, insisting on wearing 3 pairs of shorts at a time, and becoming severely agitated when his routine was disrupted. If the latter occurred, Gary would spend hours getting prepared for the day, oftentimes resulting in his constant tardiness at school. His agitation quickly turned to anger, and Gary would become disrespectful to his mother. In 2013, Gary was arrested for the first time. His charges included criminal confinement, battery, and intimidation. Gary was accused of pushing and kicking his mom before he grabbed 2 kitchen butter knives and tried to stab her. She sustained minor injuries, and Gary was immediately sent to a juvenile detention facility, where he was held for several hours before being released back into his mother's care. Gary had to attend juvenile court proceedings and was ultimately sentenced to probation and counseling. A year later, in 2014, Gary started homeschooling, and during that time, a social worker was making twice-weekly home visits, checking in on Gary and his progress. Things seemed calmer for a brief period, and Gary eventually returned to in-school learning. On June 22nd, and again on June 30th of 2015, Gary was required to undergo a speech and therapy assessment. The assessment was ordered after the student support services raised concerns about Gary accessing inappropriate content online. Furthermore, it was reported that Gary talked incessantly, often getting reprimanded. In addition, Gary, at 14 years old, still needed assistance from his mother in selecting clothing to wear to school. To be clear, he dressed himself fine, but needed his mom to actually pick out the clothes he wore. Gary preferred loose-fitting clothes, though he detested wearing jeans and flatly refused to don anything that was name brand. Gary would wear the same shirt day in and day out, until his mother had to force him to change. Oftentimes, she had to bring to Gary's attention that he was becoming odorous due to his prolonged wearing of the same clothes. Other issues Gary had with his manner of dress included his refusal to wear bright colors. He didn't want to stand out, and never tying his shoes because he just couldn't be bothered to do so. Anytime new clothing was bought for him, Gary immediately removed every single tag, including the tags with care instructions. Another constant struggle was Gary's eating habits. He was very choosy about what he ate, and he primarily would only consume deep-fried foods, chips, and strawberry ice cream. Between ages 6 and 9, Gary was obsessed with toy cars, and loved playing with them. He could always be seen carrying around a toy car, and would meticulously line them up in a row, becoming enraged if someone messed with the perfect line of cars. Gary could throw quite the temper tantrum, and his outbursts were escalating as he grew up. In the later years, after about age 10, his fixation transferred to Lego, especially Star Wars Lego. Again, if any of his specially placed Lego were moved or somehow toppled, Gary would lose his mind, his anger boiling over. In addition to his cars and then Legos, Gary collected odd items such as candy wrappers and rocks. His other great interest was anime movies, and although he couldn't understand the languages, older German and Russian songs were his favorite. Isolated was a mostly apt description for Gary. He had one friend when he was about 14 years old, but otherwise, he rarely spent his time with others. avoiding conversation or any other kind of social interactions,